In 1905, a 26-year-old patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, published 4 papers in a single year that permanently changed the human understanding of reality: the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity, the relationship between energy and mass that produced the most famous equation in human history. 4 papers, 1 year, one man working alone in obscurity who single-handedly rewrote the laws of physics while processing patent applications during the day. That is the version you were given, the lone genius, the humble civil servant with the wild hair and the absent-minded warmth who thought his way to the edge of the universe from a desk in Switzerland and changed everything. It is one of the most carefully constructed myths in modern history, not because Einstein was not brilliant, he was genuinely, extraordinarily brilliant, but brilliance is not the same as solitary, genius is not the same as alone. And the story of how Albert Einstein became the most recognizable scientist in human history is also the story of a woman who was arguably equally brilliant, who worked alongside him through the most important years of his intellectual life, who he referred to in his own letters as his partner in science, and who history erased so completely that most people reading this sentence do not know her name. Her name was Mileva Marić. She was a Serbian mathematician and physicist. She was the only woman in her class at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, one of the only women studying physics at university level anywhere in Europe at the turn of the 20th century. She was by every account of the people who knew her during those years exceptionally gifted. She and Einstein met as students. They studied together, debated together, worked through problems together, fell in love over physics in a way that their letters from that period make almost impossible to misread. Einstein's letters to Mileva during the years surrounding 1905 are specific and they are important. He writes about our work, our research, our theory of relative motion, not my work. Our work. The distinction is not casual. Einstein was not a man who shared credit easily or generously. The fact that he used that language in private correspondence that he did not expect the world to read tells you something about what the collaboration actually looked like from the inside. Mileva never published independently. She never attached her name to any of the papers that emerged from those years. The reasons for this are genuinely debated by historians, and the debate is not simple. Some argue she deferred to Einstein's name because in 1905, a paper co-authored by a woman would have received a different reception than one authored by a man alone. Some argue Einstein made the decision about attribution, and she had less control over it than the romantic version of their partnership suggests. Some argue her contribution has been overstated by historians wanting a cleaner narrative of injustice. What is not debated is this. In 1921, Einstein won the Nobel Prize for Physics. As part of their divorce settlement negotiated years earlier, he had promised her the Nobel Prize money if he ever won it. He transferred the entire sum to her upon receiving it. Men do not typically give their ex-wives their Nobel Prize money. The question of why Einstein did is the question this video is built to answer, and the answer dismantles the myth more completely than anything else in this story, because the myth of the lone genius requires the people who helped build the genius to disappear, and Mileva Marić did not disappear quietly or without cost. She disappeared because the man she loved and worked beside and built a life with made very specific decisions about what the world would know and what it would not. And those decisions started long before the Nobel Prize. They started with a letter. In 1897, Mileva Marić arrived at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich to study physics and mathematics. She was 21 years old, Serbian, and walking into an institution that had admitted women for barely a decade and still did not fully believe it had made the right decision. She was one of 5 students in her program, the only woman. She had passed the entrance examination with results that placed her among the strongest candidates in her cohort, regardless of gender. She was also walking with a slight limp from a congenital hip condition that had shaped her entire life, the specific experience of someone who had been underestimated based on appearance since childhood and had responded by becoming someone impossible to underestimate based on ability. She and Einstein were in the same program. He was a year younger. By the accounts of their fellow students, they were immediately recognizable as intellectual equals who had found each other in a room full of people neither of them could fully talk to. The letters that survive from their early years together, and there are many, because Einstein wrote to her constantly, and with a warmth and specificity he showed almost nobody else, reveal 2 people working through the same problems with the same intensity and finding in each other something that felt, at least for a while, like the right match. Einstein called her a creature who is my equal and who is as strong and independent as I am. Those are not the words a man uses about a woman he considers decorative or peripheral. Those are the words a man uses about someone he recognizes as operating at his level. Their collaboration through the early 1900s is where the historical record becomes genuinely contested and genuinely important. The 1905 papers, the ones that made Einstein's name permanent, were produced during a period when he and Mileva were living together, working together, and by the evidence of his own correspondence, treating their intellectual work as a shared enterprise. A Russian physicist named Abram Joffe, who had access to the original manuscripts of the 1905 papers before they were published, later wrote that the papers were signed Einstein Marić, Marić being the Hungarian version of Marić that Mileva used formally. Joffe's account is disputed. No co-signed manuscript has been produced, but Joffe had no obvious motivation to fabricate the detail, and his account has not been definitively disproven. What has been definitively established is the content of Einstein's letters, our work on relative motion, our theory, our investigation, written in the years immediately surrounding the papers, written in private, written to the one person in the world he apparently felt no need to perform the lone genius narrative for, because she was inside it with him. She failed her final examinations twice. The first time she was pregnant with their daughter Liesel, a child born out of wedlock in 1902, whose fate is unknown, and who Einstein apparently never saw and rarely mentioned. The pregnancy and the social weight of unmarried motherhood in 1902, Austria-Hungary, and what that cost a woman trying to complete a physics degree is not a small detail. It is the entire context for understanding why Mileva's trajectory diverged from Einstein's at exactly the moment when their intellectual collaboration was most intense. He passed. He got the patent office job. He continued working. She failed her examinations a second time and never returned to complete the degree. The woman, who had been his intellectual equal in every sense that their letters document, spent the years of his greatest productivity raising their children in Bern while he worked. Historians, who want a simple story, call this a tragedy of circumstance. The record suggests it was also a tragedy of specific choices made by a specific man who understood exactly what the arrangement cost her and made it anyway, because the letter that explains everything was written not in 1905 but in 1914, and it is one of the coldest documents in modern history. In 1914, Albert Einstein presented his wife Mileva with a written list of conditions she would have to meet if their marriage was to continue. Read the list slowly because each item on it requires sitting with. She was to ensure his clothes and laundry were kept in good order. She was to serve him 3 meals a day in his room. She was to keep his bedroom and study clean and not allow him to be disturbed. She was to renounce all personal relations with him beyond what was required for social appearances. She was to stop expecting intimacy or affection from him. She was to answer him when spoken to. She was to leave his room immediately when asked. This was not a private thought or a moment of cruelty in an argument. This was a written document, formal, itemized, presented to her as the terms under which he would remain in the marriage. Einstein was 35 years old when he wrote it. He was already one of the most celebrated physicists in Europe. He was also already involved with his cousin Elsa, who he would eventually marry after divorcing Mileva. The conditions were not an attempt to save a marriage. They were a document designed to make the marriage so unbearable that its end would feel like Mileva's choice rather than his. Mileva accepted the conditions initially, then she took their 2 sons and returned to Zurich. The formal separation followed. The divorce was finalized in 1919. The divorce agreement contained one significant term that Einstein proposed himself. If he ever received the Nobel Prize, he would transfer the prize money to Mileva. He framed this at the time as financial provision for her and their sons. Historians have read it differently. A man who had used the phrase "our work in private letters" for years was making a settlement with someone who had a claim on something. You do not settle a claim that does not exist. He won the Nobel Prize in 1921. He transferred the money. The gesture that could look like generosity is legible as something closer to a calculated resolution of an outstanding debt made at the moment he could finally afford to pay it. What happened to Mileva after the divorce is the part of the story that is hardest to sit with. She lived in Zurich raising their 2 sons on the settlement money. Their younger son, Eduard, developed schizophrenia and required institutional care for much of his adult life. Mileva spent years navigating his illness, managing his care, and slowly spending through the Nobel Prize money to do it. Einstein's involvement in Eduard's care was minimal, and by some accounts almost non-existent. He left Europe for America in 1933 and saw his sons rarely after that. Mileva died in 1948 in Zurich, largely alone. They found a substantial sum of money hidden in her mattress, money she had apparently been concealing for years from the fear of destitution that never fully left her despite the Nobel settlement. The woman who had sat beside the most celebrated mind of the 20th century during the years that made him celebrated died hiding cash in her mattress in case everything ran out. Einstein died 7 years later in Princeton. The obituaries called him the greatest mind of the modern age, the lone genius, the humble patent clerk who changed the world by thinking harder than anyone else. The letters that used the phrase "our work" were already in archives that most people would never read, and the erasure was not accidental. Albert Einstein understood something about public narrative that most scientists of his generation never had to think about, because most scientists of his generation never became famous enough for it to matter. The story people tell about you is more durable than the truth. Control the story, and you control the legacy. Let the story control itself, and you are at the mercy of everyone who ever knew you and has a different version of events. Einstein did not leave his narrative to chance. He was meticulous about his public image in ways that sat uncomfortably against the humble, distracted professor persona he projected. He managed his correspondence carefully. He was selective about which letters he preserved and which he did not. He gave authorized accounts of his intellectual development that consistently presented his thinking as emerging from solitary reflection rather than collaborative work. He never publicly acknowledged Mileva's contribution. Not once. Not in any interview, lecture, public statement, or authorized biography produced during his lifetime. The authorized biography written by his close friend Carl Selig presented a version of the 1905 papers and their genesis that placed Einstein alone at the center of everything. The collaborative correspondence with Mileva during those years was known to exist, but was not widely accessible. The full archive of Einstein-Marić letters was not published until 1987, more than 30 years after Einstein's death and nearly 40 years after Mileva's. By the time those letters became available, the myth was so completely established that the work language they contained registered as a footnote rather than a revision. This is how erasure actually works, not through destruction. Destroying evidence is crude and leaves traces. Through timing, through the gap between when the evidence exists and when it becomes accessible. You let the myth calcify for 30 years, and then the evidence that contradicts it becomes a curiosity rather than a correction. Einstein's estate and the people who managed his legacy after his death were not passive in this process. The presentation of Einstein as the lone genius was not just culturally convenient, it was institutionally maintained. The papers, the archives, the authorized accounts all pointed in the same direction. Mileva Marić appeared in the story as a footnote, a first wife, a woman he left, someone who failed her exams. Heidegger wrote about Das Mann, the anonymous they, the social world that determines what is said and thought and remembered without any individual being fully responsible for the determination. The erasure of Mileva Marić was not a single decision made by a single person. It was Das Mann operating through 100 small choices. What to include in a biography, what letters to archive publicly, what questions to answer in an interview, what story to tell when the journalist asked how you came up with the theory of relativity. Einstein answered those questions for decades. He never once said her name in that context. Mileva gave one interview in her later years. She was asked directly whether she had contributed to Einstein's work. Her answer was careful and somewhat evasive, the answer of a woman who understood exactly what she was navigating and had learned through decades of experience what it cost to say the wrong thing to the wrong person. She said that they had worked together on some things, that Einstein was the more creative one, that she had been more methodical. The word a woman uses to describe herself when the world has spent 30 years insisting that the creative genius sat alone in a room and thought of everything himself. The Nobel Prize money hidden in her mattress tells you more about what she actually believed than any interview she ever gave. Albert Einstein died in Princeton in 1955. His brain was removed during autopsy without his family's permission by the pathologist Thomas Harvey, who kept it in a jar for decades, occasionally mailing pieces of it to researchers who requested samples, apparently convinced that the physical substance of Einstein's genius was something that could be located and measured in neural tissue. It is one of the stranger postscripts in scientific history, and it is a perfect metaphor for what the Einstein myth produced, the idea that genius is a thing that lives inside one person, in one brain, in one skull, and that the work of understanding it is the work of finding where exactly inside that one person it resided. The myth requires the individual. It requires the lone genius. It requires the story to begin and end with one person, because that is the story that is useful to institutions that want a face for scientific achievement, to cultures that want proof that one extraordinary individual can change everything, to the man himself who needed the story to be that simple in order for the erasure to hold. What the Einstein-Marić letters produced when they were finally published in 1987 was not a clean revision of the myth. It was a genuinely contested historical debate that continues today. Serious historians disagree about the degree of Mileva's contribution. Some argue our work language reflects emotional partnership rather than intellectual collaboration. Some argue the contribution was substantial and deliberate erasure followed. The debate is real and the evidence is genuinely incomplete. But here is what the debate itself reveals that nobody in the debate fully states. We do not know the truth because the man who knew the truth controlled what we would be able to know. The incompleteness of the evidence is not an accident of history. It is the result of decisions made by a man who understood that incomplete evidence and established myth produce the same outcome. The story stays the way he needed it to stay. Mileva Marić passed her entrance examinations with exceptional results. She studied at the highest level available to a woman in Europe at the turn of the 20th century. She collaborated with the man who became the most celebrated scientist in modern history during the years he produced his most important work. She raised their children while he worked. She accepted written conditions that reduced her to a housekeeper to keep her marriage together. She received the Nobel Prize money in a settlement that looks less like generosity the longer you examine it. She died alone in Zurich, with cash hidden in her mattress. Einstein died, celebrated, honoured, and permanently installed as the definitive image of human genius. The story that produced that outcome was not assembled by accident. It was assembled piece by piece, interview by interview, archive by archive, biography by biography, by a man who was as deliberate about narrative as he was about physics. Seneca wrote that a great man is not diminished by being seen clearly. He was right. Einstein's genuine brilliance is not in question. The theory of relativity does not become less true if someone helped him get there. The photoelectric effect does not disappear if a woman sat beside him working through the same problems. What diminishes him is not the collaboration. What diminishes him is the erasure, the choice to take the our work of two people and present it to the world as the my work of one. History built him a monument. He built it on someone else's foundation and then made sure her name was not on the stone. The most famous mind of the 20th century was afraid of one thing above everything else, being known completely.